In studio with us, Ron Paul is here, and we'll go right to the phone lines, beginning with Penny. Good morning, Penny.
Hi.
Hi, you're talking with our guest.
Yeah, how are you guys today?
Doing great. What's on your mind?
Well, I just got a call last night about the straw poll up in there in Ames in August, and I just kind of had a question on Ron Paul. I haven't heard him talk a whole lot, but I'd like to talk to him about what to do about the employers hiring these illegals.
Okay, excellent. Hey, thank you, Penny. Here in Iowa, that we have agribusiness, and there's segments of agribusiness. Rather than pay what used to be what we used to be called a family wage, they've decided to import workers from Mexico, many of whom are not here legally, and they have been able to do this for a generation here in Iowa because both parties have a vested interest in the status quo. The Democrats perceive future voters, and the people working the other side of the street can make money this way. And we have de facto sanctuary status in several communities here in Iowa because the business class wants to keep it going, and you have the religious types implying that it is our duty to embrace foreigners even if they're not here legally.
Well, we have laws. We should enforce them. We should have more border control. I think it's a shame that we're all around the world and we worry more about the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is undefinable, and that those resources should be here enforcing the laws to prevent the people from coming in illegally. And I think that would be a giant step in the right direction. Okay.
How would you deal with the current crop of people who are maybe 11 to 13 million in the country illegally?
Well, it may even be more. And I think for all practical reasons, there's no way, even if you had every single military person back from around the world and you decided you were going to round up these 15 million people and send them off someplace, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it would be a wise thing to do because some of them have been here. I come across cases where they might be 18 or 19 or 20 years old, and they came here when they were 1. They don't even have any place to go. So it to me doesn't add up that you can round those kind of people up and send them off. So I'm not in favor of that. I do have a little bit of reluctance on putting the burden on the businessman because, you know, in Texas, when the economy was better, I had as many people coming in looking for workers. Why can't we get? Nobody would work. A lot of Americans wouldn't work, and they were looking for workers. Others say, you know, keep them all out. But I don't think the businessman has to be the policeman. You know, how can he be absolutely sure? And then if you set up a national database, then everybody has to be in it. So some of this stuff can backfire on us. You know, remember when we had the proposal for the Real ID Act to crack down on illegal immigrants? Well, it was going to crack down on the American citizens as well. And so there, we have to be very careful on how we do it because we have to think there's the potential of some of these laws affecting American citizens too. So when you tighten up on the borders, and really, really tight, you may be preventing American citizens from freely traveling in and out, which has already happened. I mean, it used to be, I've lived on both borders, Canadian borders and Mexican borders, and in the past, it was always easy to go back and forth. Now, we can't even go to Mexico or Canada without a passport. So it's a sad situation, but I think the most important thing we could do is to have more border protection to enforce the law, but I think you could discourage a lot from coming by having no federal mandates. Texas and other states have, you know, serious economic problems because they have to pay for free medical care and free education. So I think there should be no mandates whatsoever, and even those who you don't and you can't round up, there should be no amnesty and no voting rights. No other country does that, and I don't believe that birthright citizenship is a good idea either. That is a very rare thing around the world. Maybe 1 or 2 countries actually have laws like that, and I know a little bit about about that as an OB doctor in Texas on delivering people, under the emergency conditions in emergency rooms, and they get immediately put under the welfare rolls. So there's a lot we could do to diminish the incentive, but as long as you subsidize it and tolerate it and you don't have border protection, you're going to have a lot more of it.
I would assert that the Constitution, that we have no laws that assert birthright citizenship now. The 14th Amendment was not designed for that. The guy who wrote it says this, of course, does not apply to the children of foreigners, but that sort of has gotten lost in the debate.
You're right about that.
This is Scott. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Jan. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
I had a quick question for your guest there.
Okay.
There's a small group of congressmen.
Oops, we can't hear you, Scott. You're dropping off on us there, bud.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, real fast.
Okay. They're trying to get Glass-Steagall reintroduced. Is Ron involved in that, and is he behind it?
Well, this is an important question, but it's not easily answered, because when they went to repeal Glass-Steagall, I voted against it. And a lot of people liked it because they think the problems were created by not having Glass-Steagall, and the banks were allowed to do a lot. In a free market, though, banks would be allowed to do a lot of these things. The reason I voted against it is it invited a moral hazard, in the sense that if banks got into trouble and started investing in other things, they would be encouraged to do more than they should, because they'd be backed up by insurance, FDIC.
Right.
So to me, it was putting a greater burden on the taxpayer. So I'm opposed to it under today's circumstances. But in theory, on the free market, no, there shouldn't be any regulations on that, but there should be no taxpayer's obligation to take care of them when they mess up and get into trouble, and no bailouts.
Yeah, just my phrase is, do what you want, don't send me the bill.
There, that's a good summary.
All right. You and Barney Frank had an unusual odd couple moment last week, I think it was. You introduced ending the Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act of 2011. Now, they're now calling you guys the Doobie Brothers.
Well, I don't know exactly what that means. But on this issue of states' rights, Barney Frank happens to be right. But he was also helpful to me in getting the bill passed in the Congress to audit the Federal Reserve. But this doesn't legalize anything, this bill. This was an emphasis on something I consider very important, and that is on the states' rights issues. Difficult problems should be dealt with at the state level. So I want the states to have the prerogatives and the responsibilities, and it just happens that under these conditions, I was a co-sponsor of his bill.
Last time we chatted, the timer expired on us, and the day that I think you announced yourself as president for a candidate, Fox News said that you were pro-choice. And your last phrase was, "That's insulting." The first two paragraphs of your book, can I read those to the listeners?
Sure. It's the first chapter in the book.
Yeah. On one occasion in the 60s, when abortion was still illegal, I witnessed while visiting a surgical suite as an OB/GYN resident the abortion of a fetus that weighed approximately 2 pounds. It was placed in a bucket, crying and struggling to breathe, and the medical personnel pretended not to notice. Soon the crying stopped. This harrowing event forced me to think more seriously about this important issue. On the same day, in the OB suite, an early delivery occurred, and the infant born was only slightly larger than the one that was just aborted. But in this room, everybody did everything conceivable to save this child's life. My conclusion that day was that we were overstepping the bounds of morality by picking and choosing who should live and who should die. These were human lives. There was no consistent moral basis to the value of life under these circumstances. That's a very powerful observation.
Yes, and obviously it had an impact on me, and in that chapter, as well as another book that I wrote on abortion, I make a comment about when I was in medical school, we never talked about abortion. The subject was never discussed. I was in medical school from 57 to 61, but it was during the 60s that the morality of the country changed, with the war going on and drugs being used and abortion being done wholesale against the law, that I make the point that the morality of a society has a lot to do with the legislation. The legislation was bad and Roe versus Wade was bad, but that's not the basic flaw. The basic flaw is within us, in the morality of the people that encourages these laws. So the Supreme Court literally was responding to what the people were doing wholesale. But I've often talked about one way that I was able to help a lot of young women who wanted abortions was the use of the ultrasound. And Bernard Nathanson, who had done 65 or supervised 65,000 illegal abortions in the 60s, became right to life when he saw the ultrasound. And this fetus, even when very small, has a heartbeat and movement and fingers and toes. He couldn't do the abortions anymore. I thought that was pretty fascinating.
And you also say Roe versus Wade does not need a constitutional amendment. All it needs is a vote. And you guys can put aside that ruling. That's right. And one of the very frustrating things I have found in working in the Right to Life movement has been that I've had a bill called We the People, and it takes some of these social issues and gets them out of the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Because when the court rules, it rules it for all of us. I don't want these national solutions when they go wrong. So, no, Roe versus Wade shouldn't have been heard. But if they would pass the We the People's Act, it can be done by the majority vote in the House and a presidential signature and majority in the Senate, and then the jurisdiction stays with the states. And therefore, if that would have been done, because I couldn't get people excited about this when we had the House and the Senate and the presidency. Just think if this would have been passed a long time ago, we would have saved a lot of lives. Absolutely. We're talking with Congressman Ron Paul here in the studio with us. A last segment together. Back in a moment at 1040 WHO. Congressman Ron Paul is here in the studio with us. He's running for the presidency, and you have your own funds. Some of the so-called frontrunners are already having money problems, and some of the guys who are high profile have already sort of dropped out, and staff has left, and they've lost people. You're pretty well funded, aren't you? We have been, and I feel very fortunate because I've never been a very good fundraiser. That is, I don't make phone calls, and like others do, and they have their high donors. That over the years, it's been spontaneous. It was especially so in the last presidential election, and it is occurring this time that usually the grassroots decide, well, let's show a sign of support. I think the most fascinating sign of support, even though we had one day where we raised $6 million before, and during the last campaign, my wife and I were celebrating our 51st wedding anniversary, and they said, well, let's send Ron, everybody send him $51 to help their anniversary celebration. They raised over $1 million just for that. so no, that's the kind of fun. But that also... They didn't go to Tiffany's, did it? No, I did not. Not quite. Just checking. But no, that really gives me a lot of encouragement when not only do we get the volunteers, we don't have to worry about paying for the people who are full-time workers because the money has generally come in very well, and I appreciate it. There's three fairly well-funded candidates in this race right now. It'd be Romney. He's just well-funded because of his own money. Michelle Bachmann, because of her congressional race, contested race in Minnesota. A lot of money came in to support her. She's using a lot of that in her presidential race. And you guys are the money bags of the race. That gives you guys some staying power, right? I would think so, and I think the greatest staying power are the issues themselves, and that's where I think that we're doing very well, and that's the reason people send money. And when it comes down to the Federal Reserve issue, the states' rights issue, the war issues, and really the personal liberty issues, when you think about what's happening at our airports and what has happened with the Patriot Act, people who have caved in and supported the Patriot Act, which means they don't understand the importance of protecting the Fourth Amendment. And that has a lot to do with what's going on with the probing and the prodding and the X-rating at airports. So I say those are the issues which are driving our campaign and why our numbers of volunteers are growing. Today at noon, Embassy Suites is going to have a meet and greet today. The public is invited to this. Absolutely. That's today at the Embassy Suites in about an hour from now. Embassy Suites is 101 East Locust in Des Des Moines. You can get here. You'll get a chance to meet and greet Congressman Ron Paul yourself. And the website, congressmanronpaul.com. What is
Ron Paul 2012.
ronpaul2012.com. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
We come back, just the two of us. After the top of the hour, we'll have some open line time for the rest of the morning, right here on 1040 WHO Radio.